May I request Mr. Indranil Ghosh, the president of the club, please come up here. Mr. Prashanta Dotto, chair of the legal subcommittee, is already here. And seated somewhere in the middle is the man who has instigated this process years ago, Mr. Subroto Basu, one of the past presidents of the club, who we recognize today. Thank you. Swati is already also here. I formally welcome all of you, but to do the actual welcome, may I request our president, Mr. Indranil Ghosh, to say a few words.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to this third session of the Law Talk series, Trial by Media, Boon or Bane. I would like to at the very outset, I would like to thank Mr. Prashanta Kumar Dotto, Chairman, Legal and Compliance Subcommittee, and all the members of his subcommittee for having organized this program at our club this evening. My sincere thanks goes to all the panelists, namely Mr. Johor Sharkar, Member of the Parliament, Mr. Jayanto Mitra, former President of the club, Dr. Kunal Sharkar, who happens to be a senior member of our club, Ms. Shati Bhattacharya, and moderator being our own, Mr. Pradeep Gupta. I sincerely believe that all of you would enjoy this program, and it's a very contemporary topic. I would now request Mr. Prashanta Dotto to address the gathering. Thank you.
Good evening. When the President has given us charge of the legal and statutory compliance subcommittees, in the first meeting, we decided that besides usual legal work, we will complete all statutory outstandings. We are through. Secondly, we decided to introduce a Law Talk series. So, we have completed 2. And in my assessment, this is the third one is the best as per theme, and certainly because of the speakers this evening. So I thank the President, because without his help, we could not do it. And obviously my committee members and all the members of the subcommittees. So now over to Mr. Pradeep Gupta.
Ladies and gentlemen, my apology. I forgot to express my heartfelt thanks to National Stock Exchange of India for co-hosting this event. Now I'd like to hand over the microphone to Mr. Pradeep Gupta.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Prashanta. This cake has been a long time in the oven. We started discussing this a couple of years before the pandemic. As I said, Mr. Subroto Basu was the main instigator, but I'm so glad that it's finally happening. I do not belong to the legal circles, but I am part of the media. So any eggs and rotten tomatoes that you have in your larder may please be chucked at me. Swati is also from the media, Shati Bhattacharya, one of our panelists, but she is a very graceful lady, and therefore it would not be appropriate to chuck things at our honored guest. If you have any, Bodhi, please. So let us now begin the process, and it gives me a great pleasure to, in order of seniority, to first welcome our very senior lawyer of the Calcutta High Court, former Advocate General of the state, but most importantly, my senior in Presidency College, Mr. Jayanto Mitra. May I request him to please come onto the dais. Second in line, our one and only Mr. Johor Sharkar, Johorda to us all, also from my college, Presidency, and now a member of Parliament. We find he can devote very little time these days to debate in Kolkata, because he's debating certain bearded gentlemen in New Delhi in this round building called the Parliament. So Johorda, please, may we have you on stage. The third third speaker this evening is none other than my friend and fellow trustee from the Calcutta Debating Circle, Dr. Kunal Sarkar. So, is a cardiac surgeon, but and for giving all types of medical advice which are greatly treasured. But Kunal is also a fabulous debater. And finally, our guest, Swati Bhattacharya. Swati is one of the most eminent writers in Kolkata today. She writes on education and healthcare. She is head of this group called Women in Media in South Asia. And these are our four panelists. My name, as you are aware, is Pradeep Guptu, and I will try to moderate this evening's session. May we request some notepads on the table, please, in case the speakers I have just one more request. If you will kindly put your mobile phones on silent at the end of the program, I will remind you to put them on in the noise mode because we do not want a disturbance. Yes. May I request Indranil once again, are you here? To kindly felicitate our four panelists, please, along with the chair of the legal subcommittee, Mr. Prashanta Datta. We'll start with Shati first. Welcome to Shati, a small token of appreciation from the club. Thank you for being here. Then Kunal, who's a member of this club of long standing. Mr. Johar Sarkar. Thank you, Johar. He's just come from a book release in one of the suburbs of Calcutta and still made it in time. Thank you, Johar, for being here. And of course, our very own Mr. Jayanta Mitra. Thank you, Jayanta. Thank you.
Mr. Pradeep Gupta.
Thank you. The protocol we will follow is fairly well known. There will be an initial round of comments and speeches first by Jayanta, then Johar Sarkar, and then Kunal and Shati. These will try to capture different viewpoints on this motion, which is trial by media, whether it is an influence that is positive or is it a negative influence in our national life. After this, I am sure the panelists will have presented contradictory viewpoints or viewpoints that don't exactly tally with each other. And we will have a round of second set of comments, perhaps in further exposition of the points they have already made, or perhaps in response to questions raised by the other panelists. But then comes the most interesting part, which is the question answer session, in which I expect you, members of the audience, to be extremely responsive and to ask really difficult questions to our panelists. So I'm looking forward to the participation from the floor because we wish to have a lively interaction. This program is being live streamed on YouTube and therefore we promise to be on our best behavior. We will not behave like members of the Indian Parliament or some of the Indian assemblies. Oh, Johar, I forgot you were here. I'm sorry. It was not meant at anybody in particular. But thank you.
Johar included. No. It's a warning to him.
So, I can't imagine a better place to have a discussion like this. If you see the wooden plaque downstairs, from the very first, from the inception of this club, Justice, Homewood, and the connection between the judiciary, the legal establishment and this club has been extremely close and almost inseparable. Members of the legal fraternity of impeccable reputation, of outstanding integrity, have for years adorned the highest positions in this club, and Mr. Jayanta Mitra has kept up this tradition, and Therefore, it's only fair that we discuss the issue of trials and the legal process in this club. But I think all of us also forget that this club has an extremely strong connection with the media, and among the many other factors, I will mention one only. Perhaps the greatest news story ever written in India came out of this club. In 1943, Ian Stevens, editor of The Statesman, came to this club, as he always did, for lunch one afternoon. And he heard members of the service speaking of widespread starvation and deaths in their native villages. Stevens, while having lunch and I'm sure other cheerful drinks, overheard this conversation, went back, defied the ban of his editor, of his chairman, and wrote the first article on the Bengal famine of 1943. That famine, in 14 months, killed 3.1 million people. The total number of genocidal deaths in the Second World War, 5 years of the Second World War, 1935 to 1945, was 5 million. Bengal lost 3.1 million in 14 to 15 months. And the story was born in this club, courtesy a gentleman whom we have all forgotten, Ian Stevens, joint editor of the Statesman newspaper. Therefore, to discuss media and the law, I can say with justifiable pride, there cannot be a better place. I don't know whether Mr. Stevens had his lunch on this floor or on the ground floor, but I think this program is in many ways a great tribute to the traditions of both legal excellence as well as outstanding journalism that this part of the country has always stood for. With these introductory remarks, may I request my very esteemed Presidency College Dada, Mr. Jayanta Sarkar, to give us his initial comments. Jayanta Mitra, I'm so sorry, to please give us his comments. You can. I'm sorry. You know, he's taking it out on me, saying, "Presello kerokom borei thake." That's because of the Parliament dig. Please.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Is it clear to you? Yeah. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure and privilege on my part to come before you and to address you, not as a debater. I confirmed it from Pradeep that it is not going to be a debate, because I do not want to get into any battle of words in that sense of the term. This is a subject on which I am going to speak freely, frankly, and I am not going to be inhibited by any restriction in so far as my personal views are concerned. Now, I will first introduce you to the subject. The subject is the trial by media. Now, when we talk about trial by media, first we'll have to find out as to what is the status of media in a country like India. Our constitution gives us the foundation for free speech. Article 19(1)(a), which I shall just read out to you, gives this freedom. And this says, all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. Now, when this particular article was formulated, then a controversy arose that, look, you say that every citizen will have the right. You are not making any specific provision for the press. Why is it so? this question came up before the Constituent Assembly, which was then drafting this constitution. In that meeting, Dr. Ambedkar gave the answer, and this answer was like this: the press has no special rights which are not to be given or which are not to be exercised by a citizen in his individual capacity. The editor of a press and the manager are all citizens, and therefore, when they choose to write in newspapers, they are merely exercising their right of expression, and therefore, no special mention is necessary for the freedom of the press at all. This is very logical. And therefore, since that time, when the Constitution was brought into existence, promulgated, and given effect to, implemented in our country, freedom of press became a part of the freedom of speech and expression, and as such, a fundamental right. So freedom of press is a fundamental right which has been guaranteed by Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. Now, what are the implications of this? A free press is regarded as the fourth estate, an institution outside the government, and it is an additional check on the three organs of the state, namely executive, legislature, and judiciary. In my view, the credentials, the democratic credentials of a state are judged by the extent of freedom a press enjoys in that state. This is very important. The measurement of democracy, according to me, is the extent to which the freedom is granted to the press. You throttle the press, you lose democracy. Acceptance by the government of a dissident press is a measure of maturity of the nation. And I firmly believe in that. I firmly believe that if the government does not permit a dissident press, then the government is no government at all. I am proud to say that we, the Indians, have given ourselves a constitution, given ourselves a charter which grants freedom of press, and that is being guaranteed by the Constitution, Article 19(1)(a). But mind you, Article 19(1)(a) does not give every citizen the right to say whatever he wants. No. You have been granted the freedom to speak, freedom to express, but you can't, there has to be some limitations as to what you cannot do. That has been imposed by Article 19, sub-article 2. And that I shall just place that before you, and then I shall summarize what it says. It says, nothing in subsection, in subclause A of clause 1 shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law insofar as such law imposes reasonable restriction, mind the words, reasonable restrictions, on the exercise of that right conferred by the said subclause in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offense. Now, these are the restrictions which the Constitution itself has imposed. In other words, what it says is, this, it has categorized the restrictions which a citizen will have to impose upon himself. What are those restrictions? The interest and the sovereignty and integrity of India. You cannot do anything which will affect that, adversely affect it. The security of the state. You cannot do something which will jeopardize the security or put the security in some kind of, what should I say, in some kind of peril. Then friendly relations with foreign state. You cannot go on preaching things, inciting some kind of animus against your neighboring state or in any other state. Then public order, decency and morality. You cannot stand up on a pulpit and go on abusing people. You cannot say something which is immoral. Well, what is immoral? That is also depend upon the societal conditions. Then next one is in relation to contempt of court. I shall come to this particular aspect of the matter afterwards. Contempt of court, meaning thereby, judiciary is held in some kind of respect. It is something which people are supposed to honor, respect, and abide by and implement the orders passed by it. So if you do something, if you say, if an order is passed or a judgment is delivered by the court, and you go on disparaging that, make derogatory remarks against that, that you cannot do. Court will haul you up for contempt of court. And then defamation and incitement to an offense. You can't go on in public and abuse somebody openly. In the very recent past, you have seen in the newspaper this kind of thing happened. An administrator having some status went on public and vilified somebody else. This you cannot do. These are the restrictions which are there, and subject to that, you have got the freedom of speech and expression. Now, the next point that I would like to say is that the freedom of speech is an individual right, from which stems the freedom of press. Historically, it has grown gradually to become a part of a democratic structure and has assumed the role of the fourth organ: legislature, executive, judiciary, and now the media. The earliest experience that I have, or I can remember, is the investigative journalism that was that came out in connection with the Watergate scandal. I do not know, I can see quite a few senior members here, and I'm sure you will remember in 1972, 1974, during the time of President Nixon in America, two correspondents and journalists, one is Bob Woodward and the other is Carl Bernstein of Washington Post. They brought out some scandalous things which had taken place with regard to the activities of the Nixon government. The way the press went and brought out the true facts before the country, that Nixon government fell. This is a glaring example of the media acting responsibly and fairly and confronting the government whenever the media saw that there was something wrong was happening. No, but if you ask me, I was just thinking about this, that interestingly, I personally feel that the earliest demonstration of media activity was at the time of Mahabharata. I would say that the media's most glorious manifestation in the public field is the day when Dhritarashtra asked Sanjay, Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta Yutsravo, Mamaka, Pandavaschaivo, Kimo Kurvoto, Sanjaya. When this utterance was made, and what transpired thereafter, is the most glorious example, in my view, of media activity. Sanjay was the reporter. He reported every incident that happened in that particular, during those days, 18 days of battle on the battlefield. And the correspondent, most brilliant correspondent, was Sri Krishna, who sat there. The description was happening. There was no television then, but a blind man was seeing what was happening in the front of his eyes through Sanjay. And Sri Krishna was, as a correspondent, was telling the people as to what you should do. I personally feel that that is the first and the most glorious example of media activity so many hundreds and thousands of years ago. In the interest of this, this is one aspect of the matter, that this investigative journalism, where the press had come forward to bring out the truth, to represent the truth before the people. Because the press is one of the most important function is to tell the people the correct facts, bring out information, then guide them along the path of truth, come to the conclusion on the basis of the facts. There should be no conjecture. There should be no guesswork. There should be no, so to say, thought process by way of invention. Your suggestion to the people should be on the basis of facts. I was just reading a book called Civil Liberties and Human Rights by David Freedom, and this is what he had to say. The liberty to express oneself freely is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, self-expression is a significant instrument of freedom of conscience and self-fulfillment. Secondly, freedom of expression enables people to contribute to debates about social and moral values. Thirdly, the freedom of expression allows political discourse, which is necessary in any country which aspires to democracy. And lastly, it facilitates artistic and scholarly endeavor of all sorts. Therefore, a significant role of the press is to educate people, guarding freedom, keeping a watch on the government, challenging it, goading it, revealing it, and forcing it to open. A successful democracy is a government of well-informed people. one of the prime duties of the press is to guide people forward in a good government. More than watching the administration, press has a duty to educate the people. I say that this is one of the most important aspects of the matter. Press should be the watchdog, not the lapdog. Press should be the guide dog, not the lapdog. It should not be acting in consonance with whatever the government of the day says. If the government goes wrong, if the government errs, it is the solemn duty, I feel, of the press to put it on the right track. And that is one of the, I should say, one of the most significant duties of the press. It must be remembered, in modern society, only a few minority citizens who are elected by the people can participate directly in discussions and take decisions which shape the public life of the society. Mr. Jawahar Sarkar is one such. He is one of the very few who represents us, takes our points of view to the parliament and tell everybody that this is what we want. In order to effectively participate in public life, they have to be alerted and informed about matters which may fall for consideration and call for action. It is largely through media and the press that they will be so alerted and so informed. The proper functioning of a modern participatory democracy requires the media to be free, active, responsible, professional, and inquiring. All these are the requisites of a good press, good media. Don't mislead the people. Do not hold a, so to say, jamboree of debates where 15 people are sitting over there shouting at each other and nobody can decipher what is being spoken of. In the recent times, we have seen in the television, unfortunately, whenever I saw that, I used to switch it off because I found that nothing useful is coming out of the television. One person is talking, the other person is interrupting. The moderator is keeping quiet, not stopping that. What is this? That is not the operation of democracy. Democracy should operate when people are being able to air their views, to say what they want. And the press's duty is to communicate it to the people. So remember that you and I are one of the millions. Our view, we cannot go directly, it cannot go directly to the administration. So what we do, we tell the media, we tell our representatives. The media acts as our representative, informs the government, and this is what they want. Now, this is one of the aspects of the media which one has to remember. And that is why it says
Jayanta,
that
we'll have to wind up.
yes,
so-
I will. I will just give a few examples before I take my seat. So that is why I say that it has to be free, active, responsible, professional, and inquiring. Now, the other category of cases is the trial by press. Often, some sections of the media indulgence in reporting matters pending before a court of law. Media publishes or broadcast opinions and analysis that may arguably have impact on the administration of justice. High degree of possibility of such impact can be had in case of a jury trial. Now, thankfully, jury trial has been abolished from our country. So the juries will not be influenced by what they read in the papers because they are no longer there, sitting there for the purpose of holding the trial. But then, that when the public is reading the newspaper, the public is looking into the television, the public is attending meeting where the media is speaking, there, a matter which is pending before the court should not be discussed. Because there, the media tries and, so to say, color the views of the people. That may create a lot of problems. So that is why one of the restrictions under Article 19(2) is a restriction with regard to the contempt of court. That may create contempt of court. I just give one example and I resume my seat. This happened in 1978-79. I was then, I had already started, joined the profession. I remember Mr. Shiv Shankar was the Minister of Law and Justice at that point of time. And he spoke, first of all, he was a judge, retired judge who joined the politics and became a part of the administration. He delivered a speech, and I am just reading out to you what he spoke. He said, he quoted Holmes Alexander, and this is what he said. Mr. Gupta, please give me some time. He quoted Holmes Alexander, and he said, "Now you can tell what that black-robed elite are going to do next. Spring more criminals, abolish more protections, throw around more ultras, rewrite more laws, chew more clauses out of the Constitution. Maybe, as a former vice president once said, the American people are too dumb to understand." He quoted this in public, and then he made this comment. And then he said that these are the same applicable in Indian context also. He further said, Mahadipatis like Keshavananda Bharati and Zamindars like Goloknath evoked sympathetic chords nowhere in the whole country except in the Supreme Court of India. And the bank magnates, the representations of the elitist culture of this country, ably supported by the industrialists, the beneficiaries of independence, got higher compensation by the intervention of the Supreme Court in Cooper's case. Antisocial elements, that is, FERA violators, bride burners, and a whole horde of reactionaries have formed their heaven in the Supreme Court. This is what he said publicly. And the matter was brought before the Supreme Court by way of a contempt of court application. I remember Mr. J. Shobhoshachi Mukherjee of Calcutta High Court was then a Supreme Court judge, and the matter came before him. And you would be surprised, Mr. S. Mukherjee did not hold the minister to be in contempt. The Supreme Court, speaking through Justice Shobhoshachi Mukherjee, held that in his statement, Shiv Shankar was only making a study of the attitude of the court. And what he said was an expression of opinion of the institutional pattern. This by itself did not affect the administration of justice. The Supreme Court dismissed the application for contempt. And in delivering the judgment, he quoted from Lord Atkin. And this is a very vital statement that he quoted, which we always say in law, and particularly we remind the judges. It says, justice is not a cloistered virtue. She must be allowed to suffer the scrutiny and respectful, even the outspoken comments of the ordinary man. This is what he said about the judges. Then he further said, with malice towards none, with charity for all, we must strive to do right in the light given to us to determine that right. And this is quoted from Abraham Lincoln. He said, and I believe that that is the correct approach, that to criticize a judge fairly, albeit fiercely is no crime, but a necessary right. But vulgar demonstration should be definitely deflated by dignified bearing. These are very priceless words. I do not know how many of us remember this, but the judges will be well advised to remember this, and particularly when dealing with press, particularly contempt of court, one has to remember these very, very pertinent words. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. That was really outstanding. It ranged from Mr. B.R. Ambedkar's defense of press freedom to the description and definition of the contempt laws that govern our country and the limitations placed on both the freedom of the press as well as the rights and powers of the judiciary in the exercise of its constitutional mandate. Now, the political establishment, the judiciary and the legal fraternity and the media form a triumvirate in democracy which cannot be ignored. We are aware of famous political trials both before independence and after, which really shook up the country and was covered extensively in the media. At the same time, whether it was before 1947 or after, there is no denying the fact that the media was deeply divided. Before 47, it was the nationalist media and the pro-colonial media. After independence, we have seen media that is perhaps more loyal to one political establishment or one political discipline than the other. To explore this relationship between media, politics, and the legal fraternity, may I request Mr. Johar Sarkar to address us. Johar, in his usual style, has a small notepad, a sheet from a notepad with some interesting scribblings, which I'm sure will regale us for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always nice to be in this club. Pradeep started by accusing me of being a politician, or the thing. I can take it on oath that I am a member of parliament for absolutely no fault of mine. I was just elected because I talked too much, or wrote too much, that's all. Now, he doesn't say nice things that I was also president and I'm also on the club and all that. The topic that we are discussing today, trial by media, is not as easy as we'd like to think. What comes to our mind immediately is something like Sushant Singh Rajput's case, where every gory detail of who said what and who WhatsApped what to whom came out and had very little connection with the case. What Mahesh Bhatt may have said to this young lady is none of our business to know. I don't think it's anybody's business to know. But then, as I said, the topic is a bit complicated, and to make it easier for us to understand, I would split it into 3 to 4 parts. One is, no one is questioning the right of the media to expose. To expose is not to drag it on trial. To expose is a fundamental right of the media. I've been part of it. I started in the media, then made the mistake of joining the IAS, and I'm ended my career 5 years in the media. It's not as easy as you think. You are up against a stone wall. I know, now that I'm in the opposition, I know what a stone wall means. It's very difficult to ferret news, accurate news. So they have their task made out, and no one is accusing them of any wrongdoing by exposing. If somebody exposes a fat man with a girlfriend, it's their business. No one can come in the way, should come in the way. That's my personal belief. I don't know what I should say publicly, but it really doesn't matter. We are among friends. So the right to expose corruption, the right to expose wrongdoing is their fundamental right. And our present problem is that many of them seem to have developed cold feet. They don't seem to be taking extra energy in exposing what is right, but in agreeing with the narrative that has been set. That is our charge against the media, not on its fundamental right to expose. The second part of it is my and your privacy. Expose what? If I have WhatsApp someone at 1 o'clock at night, as every other human being has done, I'm talking of male friends. Yeah, they're looking so suspiciously at me, but whatever I've done is my business. Why do you need to take my WhatsApp and say he said what and this? The language may not be very civil. So let me be within the walls of my privacy. You have no business to come and disturb my privacy. And privacy is not something that you are giving me, you are donating me as the annual subscription for Durga Puja. Sorry. Privacy is my fundamental right, and it has been enshrined, as Jayantoda put it so well, in Article 19, with or without limitations. Article 21 gives me the right to privacy. The UN Declaration on Human Rights enshrines it. The International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, Article 12 says I have the right, and it is a well-guarded right. You cannot take it away from me because A, you did not give it to me. We earned it. So having said that, privacy, what constitutes breach of privacy and what constitutes exposure is the thin dividing line. Is photographing Jacqueline Onassis in the Altogether on Scorpius Island an invasion of privacy or an exposure? I mean, exposure of her photographs. Photographs of her photographs, whatever. So, is it constitute an act of invasion of privacy? Every man with certain degree of common sense, of course, there are lots of them floating around with even lower than the minimal degree. But having said that, none in this room. Having said that, I would insist that we know where there's a breach of privacy. Why do we need to see the intimate connection between, say, that girl, what's her name? That Riya Chakravarti, whatever. So, and that young man whom I actually saw after his death, but never mind. I didn't tell it to my son, he would get shocked at my degree of irrelevance with a disconnect with life. Whatever be it. Now this too, what does it matter? What they're exchanging? It's biology that's prompting them. So what's your concern about getting into their biological expression or the expressions over their processes? What does it matter? So there, that invasion into privacy is a second matter. But the third dangerous matter that emanates out of number one and number two is the trial on media. Trial by media. Trial on media is not per se bad. Aurobindo's trial on the Indian media was a big wake-up call to Indians to stand up to British rule. It was serialized. Every day of the court, Alipur Judges Court, was serialized. And it should be. So that is trial reported by media. But here, the media was conducting the trial on behalf, obviously, of elements who were there, had their vested interest to sink the ship of Bollywood because it was getting too arrogant. That's it. We know it, I know it. It was followed by this, that Shah Rukh Khan's son, whatever his name, God bless him. Now, for a few grams, and then you get tons and tons of that drug landing up in a friendly port by a user-friendly man who lent his plane to someone to come to Delhi to take his oath and has been paid magnificently thereafter. That is not exposed. So what can be exposed and what can be done is a matter which everybody with his right conscience would know. But the objection is, can the media take on the role of legal practitioners on the bar or the bench? I would submit no. I would submit no. A, sir, madam, you are ill-informed. B, you have TRP swinging in front of you. You have circulation figures and TRP. You are not motivated with the right neutrality of desire. And you have no business messing up into somebody else's business. So there I would say that having been with the media also, it is none of our business. And see how dangerous it is to human society. The most famous, notorious public trial case of public trial on media case was the Dreyfus case. Every student of journalism knows the Dreyfus case, Dreyfus. In the 19th century, Dreyfus was accused, he was a Jew, and he was accused by the French media of all the sins that are humanly possible. This was preceding the anti-Judaic wave of Europe, of Hitler. And he was tried over and over again by the media that condemned him. And finally, the trial court found that he was not guilty, much to the disappointment of the satiated readers. Now, this sort of thing has been going on. I have mentioned in the recent past that Sushant Singh Rajput's case, I can go on mentioning any number of cases where people are tried out on the media. Note somebody turn back and say that current events in Bengal, see, I stick my neck out like a giraffe and that's my problem. Now, would the current events in Bengal not be exposed? I say, of course. But please don't carry on the trial that the judge's court should do, not you. Give the evidence, let the official evidence found. In fact, I had also forgotten that those red notes were 2,000 rupee notes. I'd forgotten, I don't see them anymore. But never mind. Now, each one has his assigned duty, and we should not, I humbly seek, cross over to assume the charges of professionals meant for that. Titillate the audience for viewership or for circulation. No, there are some places we draw a line. This is not governed by the sweet will of the government or the bitter will of the government, as is evident now. It is not governed by that. It is governed by codes. The British NBA, the Broadcasting Authority, has a code. The French Civil Code covers my right to privacy and how much you can poke in. The Swedish Central Court has laid down guidelines. And in India, there have been feeble attempts to, I was on the press council, again for no fault of mine. So, and I have gone through the deliberations. They're like plucking little flowers and chucking it at a rhinoceros, that sort of thing, as effective as that. You can't do anything with such thing. So in India, it is within the realm of intent. India, today the fear is not that the trials are carried on the behest of governmental interest. Exposures are made at the interest of certain interests. Or else the outright purchase of MLAs of Maharashtra don't make news. No ED, no CBI goes there. The going figure to me, if I heard in the corridors of Parliament, was something like 10,000 crores. And somebody said 10,000 crores? आप बच्चे हो ना, आप नहीं जानते हो कुछ. I said, ठीक है. चलो, nothing is exposed. So we have, coming back to the topic, I would say the right of the media to expose, to inform, and there's a third word. Sati Otaki, entertain. Inform, educate, entertain. The entertain is getting to be a bit too much. And not to kowtow. Not to kowtow isn't not to be over agreeable in the position of lapdogs, what is now known as Godi. I have been very much part of the emergency, and it was on a particular day of the emergency that I was declared to be in the IAS, again for no fault. So I just switched over from this side of the barricade to the other side. That's all. Carried on my. So I know what the emergency was. We know what it was. So we have seen people with spine stand up at that point of time. We see very little people, very few people with spine now standing up. That is our moderation. Trial by media is ipso facto right at the beginning. Trial by the media is something that we just need not even discuss. They have no right. It is like a veterinary doctor performing Kunal Sarkar's duty. He will not know which part of the body to open. So why assume, why empower somebody who is not authorized or educated enough to get in just because he has the weapon of exposure? I do submit again, I come back, that I respect the right of the media, the duty of the media, and the difficulties of the media. I really know how difficult it is to ferret out news, especially nowadays in many places of India. Very difficult. You were just blacked out. When I asked the Civil Aviation Secretary that how did you hand over 7 airports to somebody whose only qualification to handle airlines is that he's a passenger like me, or he may be a more frequent flyer than me, that's all. What are the other qualifications gone? The qualifications that we used to put up past experience and all that? He said, sir, everything has been done as per rules. And said the rules were adequately changed. Now, this is the fundamental duty of the media to expose. Trial by media is not acceptable at all, but the right to expose with certain regard to privacy of the individual, that just cannot be violated for any TRP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorda, for a very impassioned speech on trial by media and exactly where that right ends. But I must admit that the recent events in both Maharashtra and Bihar have shown us that politicians do value their privacy. Perhaps more than any other citizen in the country, politicians do need their privacy because these changes would not have happened otherwise. You've brought in this, the 3 words of inform, educate, and entertain. There was also a point in time when the media was expected to advise. And I belong to the financial media, where part of our job is also to enrich. But I think that's what. Nowadays, I guess only a few are getting enriched, while the others are getting pauperized. So may I now request Dr. Kunal Sarkar, an eminent surgeon and thinker in this space, to tell us what he thinks. Kunal's role, if nothing else, is because most of these trials by media, in a ballpark figure, about half the trials in this country by media deal with the healthcare sector. That's the overwhelming body of evidence. So Kunal, over to you.
Pradeep, thank you very much. It's always an extremely tough act to follow Johorta on any podium. If some of you may be wondering that what has a doctor got to do with media, I think somewhere in the first half of the 18th century, a certain one of the first Indian publications called the Hickey's Gazette came out. James Augustus Hickey. James Augustus Hickey, who used to live not far away from here, was actually a failed surgeon. He was a failed surgeon who happened to jump ship in Chatpal Ghat, was incognito for a good amount of time, ran a fairly popular newspaper for a good amount of 2.5 years. And then I think he tread on the wrong side of both. I think Warren Hastings was the one. So Warren Hastings faced impeachment when after his term as the Viceroy of India, he goes back. So I carry on you have an option whether you consider yourself to be a failed surgeon or a failed journalist or both. As I was listening to the wonderful speeches by Mr. Mitro, Johorta, some of these pictures adorns the wall of this hall. And these few gentlemen whom we looked at sat over there, 75 years ago, probably did not want to carve out a situation where in 2022, this country of ours, based on all the constitutional wealth that Mr. Mitro told you about, Articles 19.1, A, B, C, D, etc., shred the Constitution to its granular level. But ladies and gentlemen, India at its best remains a doubtful democracy. 95th out of 120 odd democracies in the world, where repeatedly each and every government, whether you are at the center or at the state, under the pretense of democracy, aspires to be a totalitarian, without exception, no matter who you are, whether you are at the center or whether you're at the state. So far, I think 5 times it has been mentioned that the media is the fourth estate. Now just have a look at how the other 3 estates have fared so far. We have the judiciary. A few days back, one of the most learned lawyers from the city of Kolkata literally had an indecent attack on the judge who's investigating one of the most important cases in the court today. About 15 days back, I listened to a lecture in person by the great Mr. Kapil Sibal, who came to the city and gave a wonderful lecture. And he spoke for about an hour and 10 minutes. And for 60 minutes, what he spoke about, the conclusion was that Indian judiciary is bent and colluded. Not very long ago, you have a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who one fine morning has a Ringa Roses congregation of lawyers in his lawn in an act of dissent, and only a few months later accepts a nomination in the Rajya Sabha and then appoints a commission where he himself sits in judgment to judge himself. This is the happening. This is one of the samples about what is happening in the judiciary. And every other Chief Justice, some of them are in power for about 15 minutes, some of them are power for about 20 minutes, and in the last 5 minutes of a Chief Justice tenure, it seems like Bhupen Hazarika's Rudali. They are all crying. They are all so sad. They are full of lamentation that what the judiciary could have been, but it's not. And this is a repetition of piling up of misery, of an inefficient, inadequate, slow, under-resourced judiciary that has been thrust upon this country for the good part of the last 75 years. Now, this is one estate taken care of, which is the judiciary. Now let us look at what the executive has done to us. 500 odd members, which got tired of an old-fashioned living room in somewhere in Delhi. So now you are constructing a new lounge, a new parliament to sit on. Wonderful, wonderful. I think it has all facilities in the world with the exception of lap dancing and other forms of entertainment. And in that newly decorated Indian edifice in the parliament, you have a cattle trade of MPs and MLA. You have them floor crossing that would even put the Guru Pachar of West Bengal to shame. Right? Where the speakers in all central assemblies are in direct collusion to hide up the lapses, where every possible constitutional principle is thrown to shred. You could go on for minutes and for hours on end. Have we acquitted ourselves well? And the least spoken about the executive is the better. We are in this great city of Kolkata, and recent utterances by the head of state of this state of West Bengal reminds me of the character from the English serial Fawlty Towers. Have you seen it? There used to be a little Spanish waiter in Fawlty Towers, and he only knew one line of English. No matter what you asked him, he said, "I know nothing." And this seems to be the recitation of the chief minister of this state, that whilst she is supposed to know everything, she knows nothing about what is happening around us, whether it is the sacks of money or lakhs and lakhs of cows. It is natural. In West Bengal, you can confuse cows from Bengalis. You can. That species confusion is possible. It's possible, considering the state we have reduced to. And you talk about Bengali, the intelligentsia. Johorda was sent to Rajya Sabha to ask questions. And what happens when you are nominated to Rajya Sabha? It is like putting a silencer on a cannon. Right. So what you do is, sometimes I get very afraid for these very well decorated people. You know, they wear so many decoration, medallions and garlands around their neck. Poor people can hardly speak. They can hardly speak. And their consciousness, their knowledge, their education out of Presidency University or what have you is guarded by the whip. Now, what does it mean? You should be whipped or should not be whipped? That is the great Shakespearean question facing us today. Where the intelligentsia of this country, who are supposed to be the people selected, the people nominated, the knowledge centers, the watchdogs, are intellectually autoclaved and put in these haloed chambers. So tell me, ladies and gentlemen, who has got to do the investigation for the people of this country? Who does it? If the first estate is tenuous, if the second estate is corrupt, if the third estate is completely incapable of carrying out its mandate, then naturally the responsibility goes on to the fourth estate, who act as the conscience keeper, who acts as the eyes and ears of the people. At the end of the day, this country does not have 130 million amoeba. It has 130 million people who have a working brain, who have their perception, who have their own powers of analysis. And even through the technological, through the historical, through the sociological evolution, media also is going through its phase of changes. We've had the newspapers, the great newspapers of one era. Pradeep gave a wonderful example. But the newspapers have gone through a physiological evolution. What do I mean? When I was young, I used to read newspapers for information. Today, when I am old, I read newspapers for constipation. Because that is a habit that my generation has grown up with. Then you came to the television. Then the eyes and ears of the people, the responsibility went on televisions. Brilliant. We had an era where, like smallpox eruptions, you had television channels coming up, everything in Hindi, English, vernacular, etc., etc. They did a great job. The newspapers did a fantastic job. The challenges that the newspapers faced, A, was financial. B, was that their business model was highly suspect. They could not keep up with the changing dynamics as far as the print model of the thing is concerned, and the baton passes over to the television channels. The television channels, obviously, they are no paragons of virtue. They also had their own leanings, they also had their subscription, but they were there, they were alive, they were doing the exposés. And pardon me, I, in my limited understanding, do not understand the whole concept of an expose without opinion. You expose to show. So if you have exposed something, you have gone into the granular detail of something, it is, you want every bite of information to come into the political domain. The credibility of television also changed. And there are many funny facts. I cannot speak about television in front of Johorda, because Johorda represented Doordarshan, which could do a lot of things but did very little. Now the whole television industry in India for 130 million people, I believe, is controlled by 40,000 little gadgets, 40,000 little gadgets which are called the TRP monitors. And these 40,000 little pieces of, some silicon chip in a country of 130 million forms public opinion, tells you and me what ridiculous serials you need to see in the evening. It gives the news broadcasters a whole lot of Viagra that how much they should shout in the evenings and how polarized they should be. And of course, Jyoharda talked about press council. The only effective council you have in this whole country is the medical council. The most dangerous judges in India are the retired judges. Because the moment you have a retired judge who lacks public transport, he comes and heads a commission. And 1 in 5 chances are that that commission will be sitting on a body of doctors. And we are the only counted professional. India doesn't have a foggiest clue how many lawyers there are in India. India does not have a foggiest clue how many reporters there are in India. But India can count for every arm and leg how many doctors there are in India. And we are at the end of a stick which is called the license. To have a hospital, you need 19 licenses. To be a doctor, you need 1 license. And just tweak one of them, you are out on the roads. So you only control that vulnerable section of society that you think you can control. So currently, there is a tremendous frenzy, there is a tremendous activity in the digital media, in the social media. Now, of course, not everything is correct in the social media, not everything is correct in the digital media. But let us for once have the goal to accept the fact that they are the eyes and ears of a failing, compromised, malnourished democracy, what you and I have today. We cannot trust upon the judiciary today to the same extent we did before. The Indian polity, both in terms of the executive and the legislature, to a large extent at crucial times, at vital times, has failed its people. So today, when you have the opportunity, when you have a device in front of people, if it is true that by the year 2030, you are going to have 30 billion users of a particular device, then those 30 million people have every right to participate in the conversation which is happening today. They have every right to do so. And I, for one, do not have an iota of doubt in my mind that the right to investigate, the right to opine, not all opinions need be true. Today you are debating the Bible. Today you are debating every holy scripture that was ever written. Today we debate the Bhagavad Gita, absolutely fine. It's a great piece of philosophy. Still it could not prevent 30,000 people being slaughtered in a period of 2 weeks. So what was all that divine philosophy for? So the right to question is a non-negotiable right of the people. And through sociological and technological evolution, that right lies in your and my palms today. And nobody will have the right to take it away. But the content creators, the investigators of that content has their responsibilities as well. Why on earth do you have a lame and limping Press Council of India? I think there is another more disastrous body called NDMA, or God knows what it is. It is supposed to be an association of the digital broadcasters or television broadcasters. It is even more useless than the Press Council of India. Statistically, you would have thought that was almost impossible. But it is. That is the fact of the matter. So we need to restrain ourselves. We need to regulate ourselves. We need to interrogate ourselves. But these fallibilities in the Indian democratic construct today, where regardless of where you are, today if you take an exception at Swaraj and Panchajanno, you have a Jago Bangla to match up to it. Today, in this day and age where every political establishment in their heart of heart wishes, they only seem to have one wish and one desire, that you are an unquestioning single-party democracy. As we go on singing the bhajan kirtans of democracy, at every point of life we contradict and we defile ourselves. And what is keeping the public discourse open? Is the digital media, is the press, is the television, are the journalists? If you have any crusaders in the country today, it is these crusaders who are fighting a battle for us. Accepted. Out of 100 pieces coming out, you may have a 20-25% rate of fallacy, mistakes, malintent, etc. If you can constitutionally corrupt people in the floor of the Indian Parliament, what harm has a little reporter done to you? If today you lack the ability for people who've been elected in one party just to flip-flop over there and your speaker goes for a little snooze, that to me is crime capital. What is that omission compared to some tiddly little bits of information coming out on some blog or bot? So that today, friends, is the only power in the hands of the people. And all this hype that you hear in and around us, trial by media, protect ourselves with a backlog of 5 million cases, the rights of the judiciary are sacrosanct. Do not get misled by these things. It is your right and my right to question. And with the evolution of time, technology, and society, the way you question, the way I question, the way we express our opinions will evolve and change. And that change has to be accepted. Being an ignorant person, I cannot quote, great judges and big pieces of judgment. When I was thinking, whilst driving down from hospital today, about today's topic, there was only one quote that came to my mind. And that quote was of a Sylheti Sufi saint who, in the early part of the 20th century, used to sit outside the bazaar in Sylhet and compose these songs. The great Shah Abdul Karim. Get to YouTube and listen to this song. Amar hath bandhibi, pa bandhibi, mon bandhibi kamone. Amar chok bandhibi, mon bandhibi, poran bandhibi kamone. গান্ধারীর আবেদন অনেক হয়েছে, চোখ খুলে দেখুন, গলা খুলে প্রশ্ন করুন. In that lies the future of Indian democracy. I remain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kunal. It's indeed, he's added two more dimensions to the media, which is to investigate and to opine, and to say that the importance of social media is not something we can ignore at any point in time. Before Swati Bhattacharya is our next speaker, and she represents the media as I do. And I just want to remind you of one thing. I'm giving you some of the biggest subjects, the national issues that are burning before us. The Citizenship Amendment Act, the Sedition Act, the Article 370, the abrogation of Article 370, the legitimacy of electoral bonds, the legality of UAPA, the Anti-Terror Act, and of course, the Act of Reservations, whether it should be limited to only the economically disadvantaged. Dear audience, I wish to remember you that our judiciary has heard none of these cases in the last 1,000 days. All the cases are pending for 1,000 days or more. And I can give you the specific details because I asked some of the legal reporters in a newspaper in Chennai called The Hindu, in a legal newspaper. Yes. So just remember these issues, cases on these issues, proper cases filed in the courts of law have not been heard for 1,000 days. And I'm so glad that there are some journalists, some media in this country which occasionally stand up and write on this. The fact that for 1,000 days we've done nothing. So I think I've given you a pretty good opening gambit. This is our effort to defend the media against our very friendly seniors who would perhaps think that the media is stepping beyond its limits. Meanwhile, I hope you're
Thank
sharpening
you.
your questions. So, because soon after this, maybe we'll go into the question answer round.
Thank you so much. As you can see, our moderator is a wise man. He knows that men may speak volumes, but women will have the final word. So I have been listening very intently with a lot of interest, like all of you, to our very erudite, eloquent speakers. And I have been trying to note the ways in which they thought we could define media trial and determine exactly what it is and what is its scope and what can we do with it and how far the media can go and where it should stop. And all of that brought to my mind that very famous story of the US judge who was judging a case on pornography. So on both sides, the legal counsels, they were trying to define pornography, what is pornography, what it means, when it is art, when it is pornography. And at some point, the judge was completely bored and told them, listen, I know pornography when I see it. And that exactly, ladies and gentlemen, is the situation with media trial also. You instinctively know when the media is being unfair. Because and we also as journalists have to depend on your instinct of what is fair, what is just, what is right, and what is valuable, and what is deserved. Because it is our business to put people on trial every day. In every news that we write, every opinion piece we write, we put the rich, the powerful, the revered of the country on trial. Every piece of news is a call for your judgment. It's not just a piece of information. It's not just education. It's for you to judge. And so I think that many of you, I think practically all of you, along with most of us journalists, were cringing when the case which repeatedly came up today, that awful media trial case of Riya Chakravarti, Sushant Singh Rajput's girlfriend. Because why? Because the whole intent, it's not just, as Jawharda said, it's not just, it was meaningless, it had no link to anything of public interest. But even apart from that, media, a part of the visual media at that point was appealing to the voyeuristic, the misogynistic appeal of people. Those instincts they were appealing to. They were appealing to the bad instincts, the most basic kind of, they were actually asking people to take delight in a young girl's humiliation and helplessness. So it was wrong. And we all remember, what is particularly sad to us is that the media then did not seem to have evolved, because one of the very first media trial cases in India, I'm sure many of you will remember, it has almost become a myth, the Nanavati case. In 1959, K. Nanavati shot Prem Ahuja, who was the lover of his wife Sylvia. And Blitz, which was a Mumbai tabloid at that time, took out the headline, 3 shots that shook the nation. And for days and days and weeks, Blitz continued such a, put the whole thing on a trial. They were reporting on a trial, but they were also inviting people to judge on the character of the adulterous wife. And so deep was the impression that only very recently you had that film called Rustam, which was again, a reenactment of the same drama. So you can see that media trials which intend to appeal to your instincts of, voyeurism and misogyny, hatred, people, that is extremely harmful, and nobody can excuse it in any way. Our business, of course, is to expose the truth. And there, as you have been seeing, investigative journalism. There, what do we do? How does media trial differ from media investigation? In media investigation, we put up proper evidence, evidence that would even stand up in a court of law. Look at the Panama Papers, look at the Paradise Papers, look at the way a consortium of journalists have brought out some of the most awful tax evasions of the richest, heads of state, including the Queen of England. Look at the way the Pegasus spyware, look at the way the Raffle deal was brought out. There was some lamentation here that we don't have those journalists anymore. No, sir, we have them, except for the 44 who got killed because of what they wrote between 2014 and 2019. And every year since that, then journalists in India are being killed, they are being shot, they are being burnt, they are being stabbed to death. It is my business to expose the truth. But, sir, it is your business to ensure that I return home safe and can sleep with my children after I have exposed the truth. Putting media on trial, as Dr. Sarkar was telling us right now, is also in a way putting society, putting state, putting judiciary, putting the executive on trial. Finally, we have to try ourselves. Now, I have only one point to make. They have made so many points, and all of them very important. My contribution to this discussion is on one disagreement that I have with Mr. Jawhar Sarkar. So he said that media trial is wrong. Exposure is good, investigation is good, proper reporting is good, questioning the rich and the powerful is good, trial is wrong. And I understand why he says that, because at the heart of a media trial is an accusation which is not properly founded on evidence. I accept that. But I still ask you that is it always the case that such media trial is harmful, is a bane for society? Or are there cases where even such media trial is justified? I bring to your notice the case of Me Too, the Me Too movement. It is very well known that this movement happened mostly on social media. So powerful was the movement. It was a movement of women coming together to voice their resentment, their anger, and their protest of sexual harassment which they faced at work. Across all working places, including films, including media, news media, women's acquiescence, women's acceptance of sexual harassment has almost become a condition of their getting a job, of their being able to work, of being given a good assignment or a good role, of being promoted. Everybody trivializes the issue, but I think that 2018, when Me Too movement hit India, it took everybody by surprise. And for the first time, we understood just how deep and how wide and how awful, God-awful, inhuman is the problem, the depths of injustice we had not, the depths of humiliation that your daughters and sisters face. I don't think any of you could understand. We did not know that even the high and mighty M.J. Akbar could be brought down on the charge of raping, a colleague many years ago. 19 women journalists stood against him in court. And the court dismissed his complaint that Priya Ramani had, brought a case against him that has no merit. So the case was meritorious. The court actually, I think that this was one instance where the court actually gave some legal status, the court actually observed that there is a justification of this kind of a movement which uses the social media to bring out accusations, even though the actual things have happened in the past, and no so-called evidence, not the kind of evidence that a law court would admit is easily available. So this is because the idea of justice is so much wider. The applications of injustice are so much wider than the ways of accepted law. So many kinds of injustice are happening everywhere. I am always surprised why, people who break the most laws always say, ain ainer pothe cholbe. The ain jodi ainer pothe chole, tare tara keno ainer pothe cholen na? Why do they always say law will take its own course? It is because they know that they have the power to manipulate the course of law. They will bring in so many diversions and so many delays and so many threats to witnesses that law will lose its voice. আমি যে দেখেছি গোপন হিংসা কপট রাত্রে ছায়ে হেনেছে নিঃসহায়। আমি যে দেখেছি তরুণ বালক উন্মাদ হয়ে ছুটে কি যন্ত্রণায় মরেছে পাথরে নিষ্ফল মাথা কুটে। Too stringent devotion to the ways of our law courts cannot address these kinds of injustice. By which I am not saying that this kind of media trial, such use of media and social media to bring out the hidden injustice that is so prevalent, that is, I'm not saying that these are two different things. I am saying that this kind of social justice this kind of media trials should be a wake-up call to our legal establishment and to the executive, that our grievance redressal systems are not functioning properly, that we have to have systems in place and we have to have processes in place which are much more sensitive, which have much greater sensibility, which have a much greater reach, which are not expensive, which are not troublesome. We have to make justice much more, social justice, much more available to everybody. That is the light which will make us a truly free and truly dignified society. To live, the right to live is the right to live with dignity. And when media sees people's dignity being ground to the earth, then media always will write on it. You give, as Jahorda rightly said, that often we just don't get the evidence. So where we get the evidence, we can write with greater confidence. Where we do not get the evidence, we will still report. It will still be a trial. It won't be the ideal journalism, but it will be journalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Shati. What an extraordinary exposition. We've had the first round of speaking by all the four speakers. Shati highlighted the importance and the success of the Me Too movement in India and overseas. But also she ended with a call for the need to upgrade our legal process so that justice can be seen to be delivered. Before her, Dr. Kunal Sarkar spoke of the need to accept the fact that social media is valid media. Social media provides the voice to the millions who need to speak out but are otherwise denied this right. And therefore, even if there are a few mistakes, it is far better to have the social media highlighting the issues of the day rather than to have a sepulchral silence against all the injustices that prevail. Mr. Johar Sarkar, Member of Parliament, spoke on the right to privacy, struck a different note, upholding the right to privacy as the primary right, as a very important right. And therefore, while the media needed to inform and educate and entertain, its rights had to be circumscribed by this right to privacy. And our initial speaker, Mr. Jayanta Mitra, what a brilliant 360-degree view of the legal system. The fact that freedom of the press is equal to the freedom of the individual, the right to free speech. At the same time, a word of caution, the need to understand that we cannot cross a certain line. Nonetheless, one of the points he mentioned, Jayanta, I must mention, you said that spreading animus against a neighboring state is something that will attract the punishment of the law. I'm very sorry to say that there are multiple television channels which seem to thrive only on that. Something that we wrote on, which we learned, was called jingoism before, in the days when we were children, and that was almost more than half a century ago. It's surprising that it's something that the law gives protection against, but it's become quite a part of mainstream media today. One of the specific restrictions on the freedom of expression, yet I think all of us will agree that it's very much a part of the mainstream. There are certain channels where the sound level never dips below 120 decibels. And these channels in particular, the most visible, they claim to have the highest TRP or whatever RP they pretend to have, are thriving on this specific violation of the law. So we've had 4 absolutely brilliant speeches, and I think with the consent of all my panelists, we'd really like to hear you now. So if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, the mic will go towards you. And, I can see Mr. Tathagata Roy. Can we have a mic for Mr. Tathagata Roy, please? Yes, and please tell us who the question is addressed to.
Right, I'll do that. The first question, it's actually an observation which is addressed to all 4 of you, with a slight exception being made in the case of Dr. Kunal Sarkar. I'm a little disappointed that social media was not done due justice. The other 3 speakers, they spoke largely practically entirely on what we call mainstream media. Whereas it is my perception, and I am a enthusiastic participant in social media, that social media today is doing a great service, which I think is a freedom from media tyranny. Media can be tyrannical. Media can hold a particular line, or media can obliterate a particular line. I'll give you a very small example. It might be sensitive, but even so, I cannot resist the temptation of saying it. That persecution of minorities in a neighboring country, hardly 150 kilometers from here, is completely blacked out. In Kolkata media, people who are our first cousins, they speak the same language, their persecution is completely blacked out, and it is featured only in social media. So I would have liked the speakers to be a little more explicit on social media. That is one. And the other is a question come an observation. I think, who said it? I think Dr. Kunal Sarkar again said it. That we call the media the 4th estate. The first 3 estates, he said, are executive, legislative, and judiciary. Now, as far as I understand, this fourth estate term was first used by Edmund Burke. And the three earlier estates that he had mentioned are the Lord's spiritual, the Lord's temporal, and the commons. Now, this particular expression has also been attributed to Lord Brougham and to the essayist Hazlitt. So I'm not sure which, but I would tend to take Burke's explanation of it and call them and say that the first three media are these. That's all. Thank you very much.
I think, Tathagata, you made a very important point. I would just like to say that there are two aspects the way I look at it. One is evolution of technology. And so far in about 10,000 years of recorded human civilization, no debate against technology has ever been won, right? So it is absolutely futile to trying to fight technology. So let us not pretend to be a typewriter which is fighting the word processor. It's not possible. So that is the technological aspect. The second aspect regarding media is the business model aspect. Because what is happening is the institutions like the newspapers, the televisions, A, they are vulnerable, B, they are easily corruptible. Because of their large carrying weight, their large dependency on some external funds. You know, we talk about the emergency. We talk about Mr. Goenka. Now, Mr. Goenka could put up that bravado against Mrs. Gandhi simply because his paper had the real estate funds to depend on. If Ramnath Goenka did not have his money from real estate, I doubt it whether today is in this day and age, if you were a media principal company, whether you could have stood up to that extent. But he did a great job. And what we see in social media today is the carrying cost is low. All the youngsters, all the curious people, they can flock to the media. Yes, a lot of it is nonsense, a lot of it is rubbish. But even if 10% is half decent content, like what you said about the events in Bangladesh, that, you know, at least something is filtering through by way of information. So I think it is both a technology issue, a sociological issue, and a business model issue. And the mobile phone has been the big liberator. You know, you want to abuse me, you can't do it on my face, just record something and post it, you're through. Right, fair enough. So I think these things, and honestly speaking, there is no point in 10,000 years of India, of human history, no technology debate has ever been won.
I couldn't agree with my friend Dr. Sarkar more, because I've worked in the print media for all of my life, and I know the printing press at one point of time was considered the most nihilistic, the most dangerous of all technological developments. And yet the age of the printing press is inevitably drawing to an end. The world of paper, the universe of paper is coming to an end. Maybe not in my lifetime, but definitely in a few years, paper as a material will cease to exist except as a packaging or to wipe your face after your soup. So I see a question right next. Can we have the mic there, please?
I have a question, not to any particular panelist. Anybody can respond. Ms. Swati Bhattacharya mentioned about the Nanavati case. I'll go back to a very recent case, that was the Jessica Lal case. The court actually acquitted the accused. It's the media which actually forced the authorities to open the case, and finally justice was done. So media do have a role. I agree that trial by media is not desirable. I don't know whether this particular case was actually trial or investigative journalism, but they often, don't you think they often play a role which actually helps us to get justice?
Jonathan I think is the best placed amongst us to take on this question. You can use this.
I wholly agree with you. You see, I was going to mention about this particular case. to counter what Dr. Sarkar has said. He has said that media should not interfere in the course of trial. I agree with him basically. But then again, occasions have arisen. You have given the example of Jessica Lal case, which is a glaring example as to the proactive role the media can play. In fact, Manu Sharma, who was the accused, he was acquitted by the trial court. Then there was this march among the people, the general public. They came out at night with lamps, candlelight march, and they raised a hue and cry that Manu Sharma, being the son of a very powerful minister of Haryana, he had been spared. The matter was, when it went up to the court, then the case was reopened, and the person was found guilty and he was convicted. Now, I think that was a very important part that the media had played. There is another example in America, O.J. Simpson case, if you remember. There also, the same thing happened. The evidence was overwhelming against him. But because of, I do not know what it was, the case was going in his favor. Ultimately, public opinion, which was vociferously taken up by the media, that really turned turned the tide of the entire case. And ultimately, he was convicted and he was sent to rigorous imprisonment for life. So these are examples which perhaps Dr. Sarkar had missed out. I mean, there maybe he has forgotten, but these are issues where now I find this Bilkis Banu case, you just wait and see. These 11 persons who had been found guilty of murder and rape of a pregnant woman. And they were sentenced to life. I think they should have been they should have been hanged. But anyway, they were sentenced for life. And I find the government has released them by an order. What kind of justice is that?
I just have one comment, which is going back to Jessica Lal, all the public activism and the candlelight march, everything was very effective. But what was the cornerstone of that case was that Veena Ramani, the owner of the restaurant, about 33 witnesses had turned hostile in that case. Only this lady, the owner of the restaurant, till the last moment, she could not be purchased.
That's the point.
Yes.
This is
so
what
that
I'm saying.
Along with, and please pardon me, you can box my ears for it to be preaching law, the aspects of law to the lawyer. But why is the Bilkis Begum case important? The Bilkis Begum case is important because whilst these 11 people were serving their term in jail, you had an amendment of the Remission Act coming out, which said that for crime against women and rape, you could never have a remission. But cleverer lawyers than what we have around, what they did.
Don't blame the lawyers, please.
No, it is.
Please don't blame the lawyer.
No, please hear it out. You cannot escape. The remission was not given on the 1996 revision. The remission was given on the pre-1996 because the crime was committed before 1996. Gujarat elections are coming up, and based on which it is that loophole of law that has permitted
No. Dr. Sarkar, sorry to interrupt you. I am not questioning as to why it has happened. I said that this wouldn't have happened if the media had not taken it up. If the people of the country had not taken it up.
The ceremony has taken place, but the written order of the remission is still not available from the Gujarat government anywhere.
Okay, I can see two hands from this side. Can we have the mic? Can somebody send the mic to that side of the panel? Thank you. Yes, just the last two questions. Yes, sir. And please tell us who the question is addressed to.
Hello.
Yep.
I am Ranjit Kumar Bagh, a member of Legal Fraternity. With all my humility in command to each of the panelists, I would like to ask the question, but before that, I would like to give a brief introduction about the question. Now, like every other citizen, media has a right to freedom of speech and expression, and that is subject to reasonable restrictions, as Mr. Mitra has already pointed out. Now, restrictions are on contempt of court, with regard to contempt of court, with regard to defamation. When a responsible journalist is making observation with regard to any criminal case which is sensationalized in the media, he should know that when a witness is giving a statement before the police or before the investigating agency, that statement is not evidence in a court of law. That statement is not admissible during the trial of the case. That is our law. Even if an accused who has committed the offense confesses his guilt before the investigating agency or before the police, if that is sensationalized in the media, then he should know that this is not the law of the land. That confessional statement is not admissible during the trial of the case. What happens during the observation of the media persons? I am not talking about all the media persons. Those who are not aware of this position of law, what they do, they collect observation and views from various sources, and they mobilize the public opinion in such a way as if the statement made by the witnesses before the investigating agency, confession made by the accused before the investigating agency, that those are treated as evidence, and public opinion is formed in that way. When ultimately the matter goes to the court and those aspects of evidence are not considered in a trial, the accused may be acquitted of the charge because justice is to be given in accordance with the law of the land. So ultimately, when the accused will be acquitted of the charge during the trial of the case, people will have the impression that the judiciary has done injustice. Whereas media pointed out that these people are guilty. That opinion was formed, but ultimately that opinion will vanish during the trial of the case. So what will happen? Already Dr. Sarkar has pointed out that the people have lost faith in the judiciary. True. There are many factors. It is not so easy to discuss in a panel or in a debating society. People are losing faith not only in the judiciary, people are losing faith in every organ of the state, including judiciary. But whatever confidence and faith still people have in the judiciary, they will lose that faith, that confidence in the judiciary because of the trial and comments and observations made by the media. So a responsible journalist should know what the law is before making observation or before giving his views or opinion. So opinion, what is opinion? Opinion must be based on facts. So facts must have reasonable nexus with the conclusion arrived from that facts. So if there is, in the absence of that reasonable nexus, opinion is not opinion.
Thank you, sir.
We call that perverse opinion. So My question is, whatever, it is not done in all cases, but in some cases, some people in the media, out of their ignorance or maybe intentionally due to some allegiance to particular political party, they are trying to mobilize the public opinion in a particular manner, which is, do you think that this is beneficial to the society, beneficial to the democracy, beneficial to the ultimate function of the judiciary? That is my question. Any of the panelists can give that answer.
So,
Thank you.
Before this question is answered, I must introduce the speaker's concerned. He is a retired judge of the Calcutta High Court, had a long experience in judiciary, and had retired very recently. So the question he has put is a very pertinent thing. The issue that he has raised is that inadmissible evidence, which is apparently very attractive, is picked up by the media, and that is highlighted in the papers or on the television or wherever it is. And that is picked up by the people, general public. And the public think that this is what has been spoken by the media is the correct fact. But unfortunately, that particular thing which the media has highlighted is an unacceptable as a piece of evidence, and the judiciary will reject it. So therefore, what happens is this: the people's opinion is formed, the person concerned who is acquitted, because what has been accepted as an admission is not an admission in law. Am I right, Mrs. Bag? And therefore, this really influences the public opinion against the judiciary, which is being...
This is a question from an ignorant person. I was listening to the Ram Jethmalani Memorial Lectures. If you listen to them, wonderful series. And where two people, greatly respected lawyers, both, I think it was Harish Salve and probably Dr. Manu Singhvi, both of them made a comment. I would like your opinion about that. They said, in a similar topic, that the term sub judice in India does not exist.
that the phrase sub judice has no meaning. Would you agree with that perception?
No, I don't agree with this. That is a statement in frustration.
Thank you, Jayantada. I think, I'm reminded of the very famous former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, who very famously said that this United States Supreme Court is a court of law, not a court of justice. I think the admissibility of evidence is that crucial difference of the nature of evidence. Yes, I can see a raised hand. Oh, Priyam Marik, one of our brightest young debaters in this city. Priyam, and who are you addressing your question to?
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for such a wonderful discussion. My question can be taken up by either Mr. Sarkar or Ms. Bhattacharya, since they're primarily about television media. It's a two-part question. The first part is that when we have trial by media, trial by television media, we see so much of sensationalism, be it a channel like Times Now, be it a channel that claims to be a republic without any sovereignty. The real question that I have is this sensationalism to a point where it's inevitable? Because we are in an attention economy. Today, news channels are not competing amongst themselves. They are competing with a Netflix, they're competing with a Spotify, they're competing with an Instagram. So to really make something gain traction, is sensationalism really inevitable? Part one. Part two is, as important as I believe it is for the media to express itself, it also needs to acknowledge when it is wrong. There have been major cases in the past where television media has pronounced a judgment and it has been woefully wrong. The CBI never found anything about Riya Chakraborty. Shashi Tharoor did not murder his wife. In these cases, is the media compelled to provide not just an apology, but an apology that is as prominent as the accusation? So in case a channel is found to be wrong, they would probably air the apology at 2:30 in the afternoon when nobody is watching. Or if a newspaper is found to be wrong, they'd print it in very, very fine print as a corrigendum. So should the apology be as prominent as the accusation so that there is greater accountability? Thank you.
To the first question, no, it is not inevitable. I do not think so. Journalists have to make choices. Every citizen has a choice. And as citizens, as professionals, we have to make a good choice, however difficult that choice may be. I know I will be accused of idealism, but I still will say so, that we have to make good choices. We have to stand up for our professional integrity and for probity in social life and political life. As to the second, I agree with you that media often, since you're talking about electronic media, it's a slightly different kettle of fish. They hardly ever apologize. In print media, we do more often. And we sometimes, where we have given out wrong facts, we do display it in the same pages, in the same position where the news originally came out. Television, it is much less apparent, but I think that yes, citizens' action and legal action can be taken to ensure that where they have truly, there are laws. If you malign somebody, if there's a defamation, you can always go to court and get the proper redressal for it. But yes, apologizing in the news bulletin itself could be a good way of addressing it, and we have to see how that can be done. News has to be, we as journalists are always pointing to others, what they have done wrong, and when we do wrong, we should equally be accountable.
As former chairman of Doordarshan,
একটা comment করি Priyam, you're a young person. Don't despair about Indian media and India debates. If you really wanted to ever have a taste of the lowest brain dead form of debating possible, listen to the Conservative Party hustings which are going out now between Liz Truss and a presumptive Indian called Rishi Sunak. A country which is facing financial ruin, 13% inflation, 300% rise in energy costs. This is the most inane conversation I have heard from somebody who has not injured his skull and is not on a ventilator. It is unbelievable. If you want to have faith in life, just listen to two Conservative Party hustings. You will be full of utter admiration for the Indian intelligentsia. Go and taste it tonight.
But Dr. Sarkar, I am surprised that an intelligent and very learned person like you listen to all this nonsense and waste your time.
Jayantara, a country which in a month's time is facing 300% rise in energy costs. Can you imagine? So just entertain yourself. If you ever have a quarrel with your wife, which I'm sure you do, go back home and listen 10 minutes to each of these 5-minute speeches, and you will understand what body of intelligence our politicians and parliamentarians are.
Johorta, as a former chairman of Doordarshan, did you ever apologize?
See, we can go on making value judgments about this and that, but each one has its own nuances, each one has its own problem. About television, which makes our blood boil most of the time, if one chooses to watch them. You see, the problem is that it's a very expensive medium. So you have to run a story again and again and again and go in for a bite, which is called loop phela dao. There are tricks of the trade and there are nuances of the trade that compel it also to go in for sensationalism, because time is short, attention is short. আনন্দবাজারের মতন অত ডিটেলস বসে চায়ের কাপের ওপর তারপর বাকি হাফটা পরে পড়বো হয় না. So there are problems on both sides, but I will now, since I've crossed my double seniority, go in for a little maturity on these accounts. it's all right. I firmly believe that the media should not get in for trial. It's not negotiable. 2, 3, 4 cases Simpson can be pointed out, Manu Sharma can be pointed out and all that. But let's take one case at a time. If you take Jessica Lal, it was NDTV that inspired the whole thing. I was there in Delhi. The whole thing happened. And it's a very deserving case. But will anybody stand up for NDTV's murder last night and go in for a candlelight? Will anybody do that? So we get back to what is practical, what goes on with the times, and we have to see. I cannot accuse the entire TV media, but all I say is that if we insist that they don't get into all this trial business, but my insistence or your insistence won't do anything. They have to prove their utter loyalty to God and government, which incidentally are the same in this country, and to this merger of God and government, and have to go on paying the price of the loyalty, or they'll be raided. They'll be raided. Everybody has been raided. The right, the wrong, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Everybody has been raided, but nobody has been raided for the fall of 11 governments. 11 governments have been toppled, starting from Manipur and Goa. 11 governments have been toppled, and including the last one in Maharashtra, where you know the stakes are very high. So this toppling was not by the party of saints with Gangapani. It was done with something, but there was no ED. So let's not get into this accusation. There is a transition happening in India, which I feel as a little this thing, between the cash economy and the cashless conduit economy. There's a conduit coming in from big capital that keeps rising every day. It's a steel conduit that the party concerned cannot also do anything. It goes direct to the 2 persons. And the 2 persons control the party. They in turn control the organization. So it's a terrible thing that's happening. We need to sit back and analyze what is happening. Petty thievery is happening in places. Large-scale looting is happening in places. We all need to get conscious. So I would end by saying that we need to take an overview of the whole thing, what is going on. Need to go beyond the immediate. Nobody can condone robbery. Nobody can condone thievery. But having said that, there were scales. Even in British India, there were scales. They had set up scales. The takeover and the sale of a nation cannot be compared. The complete takeover and stranglehold over a nation and its complete sale at reduced prices on obligation basis, quid pro quo basis, cannot be compared to every Tom, Dick and Harry circumstance. So, thank you for the patience.
We have exceeded our time limit by, I think, 10 or 12 minutes. So, yes, we are having to play musical chairs with the mic as well. So we must conclude this session here. You've been a lovely, lovely audience, but above all, our panelists have been so brilliant, and the viewpoints have been different yet reasoned from every speaker. And I thank retired Justice Bagh for his very important input this evening. I think with this, we must conclude this session. I understand there are some refreshments outside. Once again, I thank the staff of the club and all our support team for helping us stage this event. Thank you and goodbye. The panelists, I'm sure, will join us for tea outside, and if you have any further questions. May we have a round of acclamation for our 4 brilliant speakers. Thank you.